Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm excited about this specific topic. So my name is Aubrey Page, and I run the Change Starts Here Collaborative, which our goal is to provide resources for parents and professionals working with kids with neurodiversity. And I personally am a foster parent, and I know that many of our kids that we are helping have trauma either because of early childhood experiences or because having a disability can be traumatic when you're operating in the world that's neurotypical and they're expecting that you're not. But you did a post on your Instagram that caught my attention because it was talking about how often Black children are labeled with behavioral disorders versus trauma. And I know even like the ACEs study, the first time it was done it was a very white study, and they did the follow-on Philadelphia study, but most of our trauma research, I think, is done in the world of whiteness. So I was wondering how we as parents and advocates can better advocate for the whole breadth of people that are impacted by trauma.
Yes, that is such an excellent question, Aubrey. Again, thank you so much for having me. For those of you who are watching, my name is Dr. Chandra, creator of the Minds of the Culture app. So going straight into your question, I would say one of the ways that we can really start advocating is just like you said, advocate without hesitancy and just like being very bold about it and letting those who do work with our children know that our children go beyond their traumas. They have personal experiences that comprises their identity, and that might include cultural aspects, that might include educational aspects, that might include communication patterns. Like the whole person, the holistic viewpoint should be considered as opposed to just one specific area and just looking at trauma, because we have to understand that trauma shows up differently in different populations. So the way in which one person might experience a trauma might look completely different to somebody else who might live in a different neighborhood, or to somebody else who might be of a different socioeconomic status. So it's so important to keep into consideration the whole person, as opposed to just thinking that we could use a cookie cutter approach to trauma, because that's not how trauma works, and that's not how we should be treating it.
No, it's not. And it's so it's difficult because when you're working in, like, for example, schools, and they're like, okay, well, we have like 300 kids at our school, 1,000 kids at our school, and we have to address all of them. We're going to teach our teachers about trauma. Yeah. But then you're working with this particular child that has these particular symptoms. And I hate whenever we look at, if I'm doing like a consultation or something, we'll look at something and be like behaviors. Behaviors are just symptoms. And so if we're not accommodating a symptom well, then we're going to get what you call behaviors. And so often we miss very like basic level stuff. Like we don't have connection. How can we help build that? How can we help build a sense of meaning for a kid? But we jump to behaviors. I know that part of your passion is advocating. So the thing actually is the thing that makes my eye twitch.
Yes, exactly.
When you're advocating for trauma and therapy, you're specifically advocating to the Black community, because you're trying to close that gap. So what does that look like for you? What kind of barriers are you trying to overcome so that we as advocates can make sure that we are aware of those?
Yeah, well, I would say number one, we have to make sure that we understand that everybody has biases, right? So whether those biases are conscious or if they're implicit biases, meaning that they're internal for our viewers watching, or you don't necessarily realize them, everybody has them. And it's important for us to get to a place to where we can get comfortable with exploring, like, okay, what are some of my biases that I have? Because research does indicate that Black children especially usually have teachers who have some sort of implicit bias toward Black children, right? And so that goes beyond the classroom. That's the world that we live in, especially when you are Black living in America. And so, one thing that we have to just keep in mind is that, just educating our those providers who are working with our children, whether they're doctors or teachers, daycare providers, whoever they are, to just really explore what are some of these implicit biases that they have, because that's honestly one of the reasons why Black children might go undiagnosed for so long with ADHD and might be labeled with like ODD or those other behavioral disorders that have such a negative stigma toward them, instead of looking at the entire picture. And it's, again, like these studies go back to preschool, but I can imagine how even just Black babies can have some sort of people looking at Black babies and caring for them can have implicit biases when they are caring for them. So number one, I would just say everybody just needs to check their biases. Number two, just educate yourself more pertaining to what trauma can look like. Like I said before, and I can't drive this point enough, trauma looks different for everybody. Especially when we're talking about various cultural groups. If we're talking about, we're again looking at low socioeconomic status versus a high socioeconomic status. If we're looking at a Black child versus a white child, again, like all trauma manifests differently. Therefore, we have to know how to identify it. Everybody's not going to present with the same symptoms, and we just have to make sure that we're not, again, utilizing the same lens in order to assess like what trauma looks like to somebody else, because it's going to look different.
Yeah, so while you were talking, it made me think of like maybe we should have a discussion on what the kind of biases that typically present themselves in these professionals or people that are working directly with kids.
Yeah.
That may mean that we miss the, I mean, I hate ODD as a diagnosis, but if we were to go that direction, what kind of things, if somebody were to see a Black child and a white child with similar symptoms, theoretically, why is it more likely that the Black child is going to get diagnosed with ODD or DMDD or IED or whatever?
Yeah. Okay. So if we're looking at it from a global perspective, right? So it's no secret that, you know, being Black in America is traumatizing in itself. And so when you think about it, people have unconscious biases about Black people in general. Black people are often viewed as being more dangerous, being less smart, being more like sexually preoccupied. Like all these different notions about Black people have been passed down generationally, whether, you know, people want to endorse it or not. Like a lot of people do endorse some of these belief systems. And again, they could be conscious or unconscious. And so if you take those same implicit biases and you're showing up in the classroom as a teacher, or if you're a social worker, or if you're some other person working with this child, some of those biases and belief systems might be activated simply by being in the mere presence of this Black person who you have all these implicit biases and unconscious belief systems about. Therefore, we really have to get to a place to where we are addressing beyond children. We're just assessing like what are some of these belief systems that we have about people in general, and how have I contributed to white supremacy structures that have inhibited them from being able to get the proper diagnoses and the treatment that they need.
Right, because the crux of white supremacy is trying to convince us that a certain segment of the population isn't human, therefore they don't deserve all of the benefits and all of the advocacy that we do for other portions. So if I were to like project that into a classroom setting, so say we have this child who is getting frustrated at their work and their frustration level is this big, and the white child next to them's frustration level is this big also. The Black child's frustration level may be perceived as this big. And so then it's like, well, they're way out of proportion for what's happening. I just don't, but it's like really our perception, because realistically we're here. Well, then if over time we always have the Black kids here in our head and this kid's here, well, that kid's gonna get real frustrated, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh, well, you think I'm mad? You know, like, yes, I am mad. And so I think it spirals. And so often we see a situation as individualized. Well, in that particular situation, I was asking to do X, and it was a totally disproportionate reaction. When realistically, this is a buildup over time, either from trauma or from people and their bias and how it was affecting that child. Exactly.
You explained that so well. I love the example you provided about how you can have two different children, one white, one Black, who has that same frustration level, but you know, of course, the Black child might be perceived differently. And again, going back to like some of our belief systems that we have that might show up in the classroom, that's why it's important to make sure that when we are in professions where we are, you know, supposed to be advocating or teaching or working with any type of child, we're just checking those biases that we come into the room with.
Yeah. It is interesting to think of. When I read that, I of course know about the bias, but I had not considered how it would change trauma diagnoses. Very often in foster care, kids are given a diagnosis of PTSD, and we look at trauma because it's very like obvious, if you will, like a child was removed, any removal from a family is going to be trauma, right? But for kids who are with their biological family, which is the goal, we don't want to separate families, right? Is those kids could be more often been like, oh, well, they're just, you know, they have that behavior issue because of whatever. And we don't see it from a trauma lens or an empathetic lens even. Because I don't know, thinking off the top of my head, maybe because the life that that child lives is so drastically different than ours that we can't have empathy for it because it's so different that we're just like, I don't know what's happening. It must be a behavior. And that's how we perceive it. This is a good conversation. I want you to tell us about your app, because I feel like that's kind of part of closing the circle on this problem we have as a whole, as a society as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my app is called Minds of the Culture. And so it is available on the Google Play and the App Store. So essentially my goal for creating this mobile application was to just create a system to where people have access to Black mental health resources, Black mental health facts, inspiration, coping skills, all in their phone. Because at the end of the day, like, people are more likely on their phones inside of mobile apps as opposed to watching TV nowadays. I believe the statistics state that people watch about 3.75 hours, or they're on their apps for about 3.75 hours a day, and they're less likely watching TV. So I figured that this would be like the most accessible tool that I could develop in order to help my community to just be more educated pertaining to different symptoms that they might experience that they didn't know was depression, or they didn't know was race-based traumatic stress, or they didn't know was like anxiety. And just really help them with like different coping strategies that they can utilize and on the go, because I have a lot of like deep breathing strategies on there as well as a Black therapist directory. So if they're looking for like a Black therapist at all, then that's something that they can engage in simply by clicking one of the links in my app.
And that can be a great way, if it's a transracial family, that if you are finding a Black therapist, that can be a great way for that child to have both how they look and then also their culture mirrored in the person that's serving them. That would be incredible. That's such an amazing resource. I love that. When you were saying that, you said race-based something trauma. I'm sorry, I missed one of the words. Yeah, can you say that again and explain what it is?
Absolutely, yeah. So race-based traumatic stress. So it's essentially saying that individuals who experience some sort of stressor related to racism or discrimination, then that is race-based traumatic stress. Like, you're being essentially traumatized because of this racism and traumatization. And I think that, of course, this has been a notion that's been around for years, but over the summer, this has been something that's been more highlighted by the media, and people are starting to actually see like, oh, maybe I'm experiencing like race-based traumatic stress or racial stress, or whatever you want to call it, because we use those terms interchangeably. But I think that because of the things that we've experienced related to the racial uprisings, especially after the killings of our brothers Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, our sister Breonna Taylor, like all these individuals who really played a role in helping to awaken a lot of people in America to the struggles of the Black person in general in America, and how we have been overlooked and traumatized for centuries. I think that just really brought things to the forefront and allowed people to see like we are hurting. And just, so, you know, I think that a lot of people have been, I've been able to identify like race-based traumatic stress in over this past year. But again, it's been around for a while now.
Yeah, I've mostly heard it called racial trauma, so that I've never heard that particular phrase before. I like that. And I'm hoping that I mean, long-term, ideally, we can get that in the DSM just so that it can be coded. Because I mean, it's incredibly common. Yes, and understandably so. I think that it's, as white people, we have the responsibility to try to imagine and empathize what it may be like. I'm hosting, in case there's any white people on the live right now, I'm hosting monthly movie discussions on different movies that address different racial topics, to try to challenge white people to like, let's think outside of our own experiences. And movies are a very like calm way of doing that. It's like a baby step. Maybe one day you can read a biography, but right now, if you can watch a movie and we can challenge our preconceived notions, because it is so easy. Most of what we're discussing is that white people are seeing it from their lens, and so therefore kids are not getting the services that they need. So we've got to change that up. That's our responsibility. But
or the opposite end, like white people are sitting from their end. Therefore, when they get emotionalized with seeing like someone die on TV, like a George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, then I'm all for allyship and all that good stuff for the moment. But then when the emotions go back down, right? Exactly.
Yeah. The numbers are.
What movies are you showing that? I
have so many. So we're doing the James Baldwin movie next week. Last week we were supposed to do Malcolm X, and then I scheduled that for the Super Bowl, so that was not a good time or good plan.
Okay.
We did American History X in January. I scheduled that after January 6th because I thought that we could talk about some white supremacy action. And then we try to do documentaries every other time. So a feature film that like feels really good and it's really easy to watch, and then a documentary that makes you be like, ugh. So I have a huge list of movies that we're going through this year. So
nice. Okay. And how do you usually have them process it? Like, is it just watching and then like asking questions afterward, or is it like journal prompts, writing prompts? Like, how does the processing go?
So it depends. Some of the movies come with like discussion guides that I will go through and like feed the questions through. And then some of them or like Harriet is what we did last week. I'm sorry. I'm on the spur of the moment. I can't remember any movie I've ever watched. So some of them have discussion prompts. So like Chandra Reynolds has done some discussion prompts for some of her stuff. And then afterwards we'll talk. And I've had some very generous, emotionally generous Black friends who have participated in the calls and have been really good about sharing their experiences, which they don't have to, but they want to. And it's also helping them kind of think back on some of the trauma that they've experienced and how like kind of looking at it in a more objective sense because it's reflective. But yeah, so basically teaching people that white supremacy is real and it really does affect almost everything that we do and how we see the world. It doesn't feel like that. But when you start looking at things in a big picture way, and you can see, like, if we look at something, we do something from a historic perspective. So we look at something about voter suppression. We're like, oh, well, that was back then, right? That's not today. But then we can tie it into now and we can see how this is how it was designed from the beginning, if you will. So I think it's been a lot of good discussion.
Yeah. So are you doing it with like other mental health professionals or just like professionals in general?
It's something I started doing like for my personal friends after May, and then I opened it up to my public profile this year. I've started posting every month what the plan is, and then people can get in the message group, and all I do in the message group is send out reminders and the links, and then we get in the group and we talk.
Okay. That sounds so interesting. Nice.
Hopefully challenging all of us, because even though I've been challenging myself for about a decade now, it's not like I caught up to speed. Now I've got everything and I don't have anything left to learn. So constantly learning.
It's a process.
Yeah.
But I will say I appreciate that you've been doing it for 10 years. Because like I said, like number one, it's a process. Number two, you'll find that since the summer, like has been a lot of like allies, like I'm for the movement, a lot of Black boxes in the profile. But then we notice a decline, like after, all things happen, people get back to their normal lives, emotions die down, and that goes into the realm of performative allyship. And so those who are watching this, like, I want you guys to hear our hearts. Like, we don't need allies who are just going to be doing it for the emotional wave. And so like Aubrey, like that, like I said, I think that it is powerful in itself that you've been doing this for years now, and it didn't take like a specific moment for you to like, especially over the summer, for you to like actually start doing the work. So that in itself means a lot.
I think the biggest first step for most white people to get to the place where they're doing this is you have to recognize that your experience is not everybody's experience. And if you can take a step back and you can recognize that somebody else's experience is fully valid, it may sound nothing like your own, but it is valid in and of itself, then we can start having discussions. But so often it's getting past that barrier. So I saw a lot of people who were very All Lives Matter before May that had a lot of great thoughts and empathy after May. But it died off because everybody feels like this is not a political issue. This is a human rights issue. So this is not temporary. This is forever. You either have to do something, step in and do something yourself to change how the systems you're involved in work, or we can just keep on keeping on, but nobody's benefiting from it currently. It does not. White supremacy does not benefit white people the way that it feels like it does. It's not helpful. So, but yeah, anyways, that was a tangent, but I'm really excited that people are going to be able to have access to your app, and hopefully that they are are telling others about it, either if they're Black themselves or if they are parenting Black children. I think any mental health message that has a more culturally responsive message is going to be super helpful. Of course, it's super easy for me to get white woman therapy information online. It's like everywhere, but for it to be more diverse, I think is incredibly powerful. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I will post this to my profile and we'll share so everyone else can hear the awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Did anybody have any questions that they wanted to ask?
Oh yeah, I haven't. I've been really bad about. Somebody recommended the series Undone. Oh, that's good, because then maybe there's some interesting outlook on mental health.
Yeah. So Aubrey, I think if you it's a question box, it should be on your end as the host. So if they submit a question, then you'll be able to show it on.
I've never used that before. No one has submitted a question then. No, I was just looking at the comments. Man, I've never even done that myself. I got to go creep on somebody else's live and do that. No, I do not have any questions. Okay. And I don't see any questions in the comments, but thank you for teaching me.
No problem. No problem.
All right. Well, I will post this and share. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I super appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was a vibe.
Yeah. Bye.
All right. See ya.